The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colorado territory when Jake Coleman found the first body. Blood had soaked into the red earth overnight. 50 head of prime cattle gone. 2 good men dead. Jake knelt beside the corpse of young Billy Henderson, barely 19, with a bullet hole clean through his chest. Execution style. The killer had stood close enough to smell the boy's fear. Jake's work-worn hands clenched into fists. This wasn't random rustling. This was a message written in blood. Old Pete Hawkins rode up hard, his horse's flanks heaving with exertion. The grizzled foreman dismounted with the fluid motion of a man who'd spent 40 years in the saddle. Trail leads north to Devil's Canyon, boss. Fresh tracks, maybe 6 hours old. Jake stood slowly, his joints protesting after too many winters on the frontier. At 42, he carried the weight of the Civil War in his bones and the responsibility of this ranch on his shoulders. But his eyes still held the steel that had earned him the nickname Iron Will during Sherman's march. Devil's Canyon! The words tasted bitter as medicine. Black Jack Morrison's territory. Pete spat into the dust. Figured as much. That yellow-bellied deserter's been sniffing around our boundaries for weeks. The distant rumble of wagon wheels interrupted their grim conversation. Jake squinted against the morning glare as a stagecoach approached, dust billowing behind it like battlefield smoke. The driver pulled up hard and a woman stepped down. She wasn't what Jake had expected. Sarah Beth Morgan stood tall despite her modest height, her traveling dress practical rather than fashionable. Auburn hair pulled back severely, green eyes that had witnessed too much suffering. Most surprising of all, a Colt 45 strapped to her hip with the casual familiarity of someone who knew its purpose. Mr. Coleman, her voice carried the crisp accent of Boston education tempered by something harder earned. I'm Sarah Beth Morgan, your bride. Pete raised an eyebrow. Jake felt heat creep up his neck. He'd sent for a wife through correspondence. True enough, but he'd expected a helpless Eastern flower, not this composed woman who moved like a soldier. Ma'am, Jake touched his hat brim, I'm afraid you've arrived at a difficult time. I witnessed the attack. Her words cut through his discomfort like a blade through silk. 6 riders. They drove your cattle north along the ridge trail. The leader wore a midnight-colored coat and rode a paint stallion. Military precision in their movements. Jake stared. You saw it happen? From 3 miles out. I've had experience reading battlefield tactics. She gestured toward the bodies with clinical detachment. This was meant to send a message, not just steal livestock. The positioning of the corpses, the deliberate nature of the wounds. Someone wants you to know they're coming. Pete whistled low. Lady knows her business, boss. Jake studied Sarah Beth with newfound respect. Her assessment matched his own, but she'd drawn conclusions in minutes that had taken him an hour to piece together. The men who did this aren't ordinary rustlers, Jake said carefully. Their leader is someone I knew during the war. Someone with a personal grudge that's festered for 15 years. Sarah Beth nodded. Then this isn't about cattle at all. No, ma'am. It's about something much worse. Before Jake could explain further, Carlos Mendoza galloped up from the south pasture. The Mexican-American ranch hand had fought alongside Jake at Shiloh, and his loyalty was carved in stone. His usual calm demeanor was cracked with worry. Patron, we have problems. Tommy Wilson found sign of a large camp in the foothills. Maybe 20 men, well armed, and... He hesitated, glancing at Sarah Beth. There are Apache tracks mixed with the boot prints. Jake's blood ran cold as mountain water. Morrison commanding 20 men was dangerous. Morrison with Apache allies was a death sentence for everyone in the valley. How long have they been there? Jake asked. The ashes are cold. They moved out this morning, probably after the raid. Sarah Beth stepped forward. May I suggest we prepare defensive positions? If this Morrison has military experience, he'll return with superior numbers for a coordinated assault. Jake looked at this unexpected woman who spoke of defensive positions like she'd planned them before. Ma'am, I appreciate your expertise, but this isn't your fight. Her green eyes flashed with controlled fire. Mr. Coleman, I've tended wounded soldiers at Gettysburg and Antietam. I've seen what men do to each other when honor and survival collide. If I'm to be your wife, then your enemies are my enemies. Before Jake could respond, a dust cloud appeared on the eastern horizon. A single rider approached at full gallop, weaving in the saddle like a drunk man. As the horse drew closer, Jake could see blood staining the rider's shirt. The man tumbled from his mount at Jake's feet. It was Sheriff Tom Bradley from Silver Ridge, beaten nearly unconscious. Carved into his chest with a knife were the words, 48 hours. Sarah Beth immediately knelt beside the sheriff, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she examined his wounds. Superficial cuts, designed to deliver a message without killing him. Whoever did this understands human anatomy. Sheriff Bradley's eyes fluttered open like broken window shutters. Coleman, his voice was barely a whisper. Morrison says you got 48 hours to clear out of the territory. Take your people and go, or he'll kill everyone, women and children included. Jake's jaw muscles worked like he was chewing leather. What else? He's got the whole valley surrounded, says he's claiming it all for the trade routes to Denver. Anyone who stands against him dies. Sarah Beth helped the sheriff sit up, offering him water from her canteen. How many men does he have? 20, maybe more. Some of them ain't white. Apache warriors who got no love for settlers. Jake stood, his decision crystallizing like ice in winter. Morrison wanted a war. He'd give him one written in gunpowder and blood. Pete, gather all the hands. We're going to turn this ranch into a fortress. Boss, Pete said quietly, we got maybe 8 fighting men, counting Carlos and Tommy. That's long odds against 20. I've faced longer. Jake's voice carried the authority that had once commanded a company of Union soldiers through hell itself. Sarah Beth, I can arrange for you to go back to town. No. Her refusal was absolute as granite. I came here to build a life, not run from the first challenge. Besides, she stood, brushing dust from her skirt. You'll need someone with medical training when the shooting starts. Jake studied her face, seeing something there that reminded him of the best soldiers he'd known during the war. Determination mixed with competence, courage tempered by intelligence. All right then, he turned to address the group. Morrison thinks he can scare us off our own land. He's about to learn different. Pete, start moving the ammunition to the house. Carlos, you and Tommy reinforce the windows and doors. Sarah Beth, I'll establish a medical station in the root cellar, close to the action but protected from gunfire. As the sun climbed higher, Jake Coleman looked across his land with the eye of a military commander. Morrison had made this personal when he'd murdered Billy Henderson and young Sam Cooper. The deserter thought he could waltz back into Jake's life and steal everything he'd built with sweat and determination. He was about to discover that some men don't break, no matter how hard you hit them. The 48-hour countdown had begun, and Jake intended to make every hour count. Dawn painted the Colorado sky the color of fresh blood as Jake surveyed their improvised fortress. The ranch house now bristled with rifle barrels pointing from every window like the quills of an angry porcupine. Ammunition crates stacked in strategic locations. Food and water supplies moved to the central rooms where they'd be safe from stray bullets. Sarah Beth had transformed the root cellar into a field hospital that would have made Army surgeons proud. Clean linens, surgical instruments sterilized over flame, bottles of whiskey for both antiseptic and anesthesia. She moved through preparations with the efficiency of someone who had done this before under enemy fire. 27 hours left, Pete announced. checking his pocket watch with the solemnity of a funeral director. Jake nodded, studying the approaches to the ranch through his field glasses. Morrison would come from multiple directions, probably at dawn when the light favored attackers. Classical military doctrine learned in blood during the war. Carlos rode in from his scouting mission, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. "They're moving, Patron. Split into 3 groups. Main force coming from the North Ridge. Smaller groups flanking east and west." "How many in the main force?" 15, maybe 16. The flanking groups got 4 or 5 each. Jake calculated quickly. 25 men against 8, but they had good positions and better motivation. Men fighting for their homes fought harder than men fighting for profit and revenge. "Tommy," Jake called to the young ranch hand, "you take position in the barn loft with the Spencer rifle. Carlos, you and Pete take the east windows. I'll cover the front approach." Sarah Beth emerged from the cellar, wiping her hands on a cloth stained with medicinal preparations. "Medical station is ready. I've also prepared other supplies." She gestured towards several glass bottles filled with kerosene and cloth wicks. Improvised explosives. Jake's estimation of his mail-order bride climbed another notch higher. "Where did you learn to make those?" "Field nurses learned many skills during the war. Not all of them involved healing." The attack came with the first rays of sunlight, earlier than expected. Fire arrows arced through the morning air like falling stars, striking the barn roof and setting the dry wood ablaze. Morrison had learned patience since his desertion, but he'd also learned to be unpredictable. "Fire in the barn?" Tommy's voice cracked with excitement and terror. Jake cursed fluently. The barn housed their winter feed and provided Tommy with his elevated shooting position. Losing it would hurt tactically and economically. "Tommy, get down from there now!" The young man scrambled down the ladder as flames spread across the roof like spilled oil. But he'd barely reached the ground when rifles opened up from 3 directions simultaneously. Coordinated, professional, deadly. Bullets splintered wood and shattered windows. Jake dropped behind the reinforced porch railing, his Winchester ready and hungry. Through the smoke and dust, he could see muzzle flashes from the ridge north of the house. Carlos cried out from the east window, "I'm hit!" Jake's heart sank like a stone in deep water. Losing Carlos early would severely hurt their chances, but Sarah Beth was already moving, keeping low as she rushed toward the wounded man. "How bad?" Jake called over the symphony of gunfire. "Shoulder wound," Sarah Beth replied, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "He can still shoot, but accuracy will suffer." More rifles opened fire from the west. Morrison's flanking groups had gotten into position while they dealt with the barn fire. Classic pincer movement, straight from the military manual. Jake aimed carefully at a muzzle flash and squeezed the trigger. His bullet sparked off rocks where the shooter had been, but the man had already moved to new cover. These weren't amateurs playing at war. "Boss!" Pete's voice carried from the kitchen over the din of battle. "They're advancing under cover of that smoke." The burning barn created a thick screen of black smoke, perfect concealment for infantry assault. Morrison was using the fire as cover, just like Sherman had taught them during the march to Atlanta. Jake made a quick tactical decision. "Everyone fall back to the house. Abandon the outer positions." They retreated to the main house as bullets shattered the remaining windows like winter ice. Tommy took a grazing shot across his ribs, but kept moving with grim determination. Pete provided covering fire with deadly accuracy, his old cavalry training showing in every shot. Sarah Beth had Carlos propped against the kitchen wall, bandaging his shoulder with strips torn from her petticoat. Her hands were steady, professional, even as bullets whistled overhead like angry hornets. "The bleeding stopped," she reported. "But he needs rest and shouldn't use that arm." "No rest for any of us," Jake replied grimly. Through the front window, he could see figures moving through the smoke like ghosts in hell. "They're coming for the house." The assault came hard and fast. 15 men rushed the front porch, while flanking groups hit both sides simultaneously. Jake's defenders were outnumbered 3-1, pinned down in a burning crossfire with nowhere to retreat. A stick of dynamite landed on the front porch with a sizzling fuse, its burning smell filling the air. "Everybody down!" The explosion blew out the front door and scattered debris through the main room like shrapnel. Smoke and dust filled the air until breathing became difficult. Jake's ears rang like church bells on Sunday morning. Through the ringing, he heard Sarah Beth's voice. "Jake, behind you!" He spun to see a bearded gunman climbing through the shattered front window, his pistol already clearing leather. Jake's Colt bucked in his hand twice. The intruder fell backward into the roses that would never be planted. But the dynamite had done its job. The front wall was breached, their defensive position compromised like a broken dam. Morrison's men poured through the gap like floodwaters seeking the lowest ground. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted in the main room. Jake found himself face-to-face with a scarred Apache warrior wielding a cavalry saber, its blade bright with recent sharpening. The man moved like liquid death, his weapon whispering past Jake's ear. Jake drew his own saber, the one he'd carried from Bull Run to Appomattox. Steel met steel in the confined space, ringing like an anvil under a blacksmith's hammer. The Apache was younger, faster, but Jake had experience and desperation driving every move. The warrior overextended on a thrust, seeking Jake's heart. Jake's blade found the gap between his ribs instead. The man fell silently, his dark eyes holding no hatred, only the resignation of a professional soldier who'd fought his last fight. But the distraction cost them dearly. While Jake fought the Apache, 3 more gunmen had entered through the side windows. Pete took a bullet in the leg and went down hard, his rifle clattering across the floor. Tommy was backed into a corner, frantically reloading with shaking hands. Sarah Beth appeared with one of her improvised firebombs, the cloth wick already burning. She hurled the bottle at the nearest group of attackers with the accuracy of long practice. Flames erupted across the wooden floor, driving the gunmen back toward the windows they'd entered through. "The cellar!" she shouted over the roar of flames. "We can make a stand there!" They fought their way down the stairs, carrying the wounded Pete between them like a sack of grain. The root cellar was built like a bunker, stone walls 3 feet thick that had been designed to withstand tornadoes. It would provide better protection than the burning house above. But as they barricaded the cellar door with whatever furniture they could find, Jake heard Morrison's voice calling from outside, carried on the wind like a death sentence. "Coleman! Iron Will Coleman! I know you're in there." Jake climbed the cellar stairs and cracked open the door. Through the smoke, he could see a figure in a dark coat standing in what remained of his front yard. Black Jack Morrison looked older, harder, but his voice carried the same arrogant confidence that had grated on Jake during their army days. "What do you want, Morrison?" "Same thing I've always wanted. What you took from me." Jake stepped into full view, his rifle trained on Morrison's chest. "I never took anything from you except the right to steal Army payroll meant for soldiers' families." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You took my reputation, my future, made me into a deserter and a thief when I was just trying to survive. You were stealing money meant for wounded soldiers and widows. And you were the righteous sergeant who turned me in, cost me everything I'd worked for." Jake could see the other gunmen positioned around the yard, weapons ready. But Morrison seemed to want to talk, to justify 15 years of anger and resentment that had eaten at him like cancer. "So you came here to steal my ranch? I came here to take everything from you, like you took everything from me. Starting with your land, your cattle, your people." Morrison's smile was cold as a mountain winter. "And ending with your life. Then stop talking and start shooting." Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. but he stopped himself. Not yet, Coleman. First, I want you to know what's coming. Tomorrow at noon, you're going to meet me in Silver Ridge Main Street. Just you and me, like the old days. Winner takes everything. Loser feeds the buzzards. Jake felt Sarah Beth's presence behind him in the doorway. And if I refuse, then I'll burn this whole valley, every ranch, every farm, every family. The territorial governor won't send troops for months, and by then there won't be anything left to save. Plus, Morrison's grin widened like a wolf showing teeth. I've already poisoned the town's water supply. People start dying tomorrow unless I provide the antidote. The threat hung in the air like smoke from the burning barn. Morrison wasn't just talking about property anymore. He was threatening mass murder to force Jake's hand. Why Silver Ridge? Why not here and now? Morrison's smile widened. Because I want the whole territory to see Iron Will Coleman die. I want them to know that nobody stands against Black Jack Morrison and lives to tell about it. Jake studied his old enemy's face. 15 years had turned disappointment into madness, resentment into homicidal fury. Morrison wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. He was trying to build a legend written in innocent blood. Noon tomorrow, Jake said finally. Main Street. Just you, Coleman. Any tricks, any help, and I'll massacre every living thing in a 50-mile radius. Morrison mounted his horse and rode away with his surviving men, leaving Jake's ranch a smoking ruin. The barn was completely destroyed. The house was a burned shell, but they were alive, and sometimes that was victory enough to build on. Sarah Beth joined him on what remained of the front porch. He's not going to fight fair tomorrow. I know. He'll have men positioned in buildings, on rooftops. It won't be a duel. It'll be an execution. Jake nodded. That's why I'm not fighting fair either. Sarah Beth's hand found his arm. What do you mean? Jake looked at her, this woman who had appeared like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying. I mean, Morrison made one mistake. He assumes I'm the same man I was 15 years ago. Aren't you? Jake's smile was cold as mountain snow. 15 years ago, I was a sergeant who followed orders. Now I'm a rancher who makes his own rules. Morrison wants a show tomorrow? I'll give him one. He'll never forget. As the sun set over the destroyed ranch, Jake began planning for the morning that would either restore his honor or end his life. But either way, Black Jack Morrison's reign of terror would end in Silver Ridge. The countdown had reached its final day. Silver Ridge Main Street stretched before Jake Coleman like a pathway to Judgment Day. Noon sun blazed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the false front buildings. The town had emptied except for Morrison's men positioned like vultures on every rooftop and behind every door. Jake walked slowly down the dusty street, his spurs ringing against the hard-packed earth with each measured step. His Colt .45 rode low on his hip, worn smooth by 15 years of frontier life. In his left hand, he carried his father's cavalry saber, its steel bright as honor itself. At the far end of the street, Black Jack Morrison waited with the patience of a spider in its web. Morrison had chosen his position carefully. Behind him stood the Silver Ridge Bank, its brick walls providing cover and symbolic weight to his challenge. The deserter wore his dark coat despite the heat, his own weapons prominently displayed for all to see. But Jake had spent the night preparing more than just his soul for this confrontation. Hidden in the church bell tower, Sarah Beth lay prone with a Spencer rifle, its barrel trained on the mercenaries Morrison had positioned as insurance. Her medical knowledge included detailed understanding of human anatomy and exactly where to place each shot for maximum effect. Carlos, despite his wounded shoulder, crouched behind the barber shop with a shotgun loaded with buckshot. His position covered the east side approaches where Morrison's Apache allies waited in the shadows. Old Pete had taken the hardest assignment. Wounded leg and all, he'd positioned himself in the livery stable at the south end of town. His job was to eliminate any gunman who tried to escape when the shooting started. Tommy Wilson, young and eager to prove himself, waited behind the general store with a bag full of Sarah Beth's improvised explosives. If Morrison's men tried to rush Jake from that direction, they'd get a very unpleasant surprise involving fire and flying glass. The plan was simple in concept. Let Morrison think he was orchestrating an execution, then turn his own trap against him like a bear caught in its own snare. Jake stopped 50 paces from Morrison, well within pistol range. The street between them seemed to stretch for miles. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his hands remained steady as bedrock. "You came," Morrison called out. "Wasn't sure you had the sand left in you, Coleman." "I gave my word," Morrison laughed. "Always the honorable soldier. That's what I hated most about you, you know. Your damn righteousness." Jake studied his enemy's face, noting the way Morrison's eyes kept flicking to the surrounding buildings. The man was nervous despite his advantages. 15 years of running from the law had eroded whatever confidence he'd once possessed. "This doesn't have to end in blood, Morrison. Take your men and ride out. Find somewhere else to build your empire." "Not a chance. This valley is mine now, and after I kill you, it'll stay mine forever." Morrison's hand hovered over his gun butt. Jake could see the tension building in the man's shoulders, the telltale signs of someone preparing to draw for their life. But Morrison made a crucial mistake. Instead of drawing immediately, he gave a signal to his hidden gunman with a slight nod of his head. The church bell rang once. Sarah Beth signaled that she was ready. Everything happened in a span of heartbeats that stretched like hours. Morrison's hand swept toward his gun with practiced speed. Jake's draw was faster, smoother, the product of countless hours of practice. His Colt cleared leather and bucked in his hand as Morrison's shot went wide, striking the dirt beside Jake's boot. Simultaneously, Sarah Beth's rifle cracked from the bell tower. The gunman on the hotel roof pitched forward and tumbled into the street with a sickening thud. Carlos's shotgun boomed from behind the barbershop, catching two Apache warriors as they tried to flank Jake's position. The buckshot dropped them before they could level their rifles. Tommy's explosives detonated behind the general store, sending a geyser of debris into the air and eliminating 3 more of Morrison's men in a shower of wood and flame. Pete's rifle spoke from the livery stable, its bullet finding the heart of a gunman who'd been positioned to shoot Jake in the back. But the battle was far from over. Morrison stumbled, Jake's bullet having torn through his gun arm, but the man wasn't finished. With his left hand, he drew a second pistol from his belt, his face twisted with pain and rage. 3 more of Morrison's men emerged from the saloon, firing as they ran. Jake dove behind a water trough as bullets whined overhead. Sarah Beth's rifle cracked again, dropping one of the gunmen, but 2 more kept coming. Carlos burst from behind the barbershop, his shotgun speaking twice in rapid succession. His wounded shoulder threw off his aim, but at close range the buckshot still found its targets. The battle raged for nearly 3 minutes, not the 30 seconds of Jake's dreams. Men died on both sides. Tommy took a bullet in the thigh, but kept fighting. Pete's rifle continued its deadly work from the livery stable. When the gun smoke finally cleared, Morrison lay face down in the dusty street, 3 bullets in his body. His surviving men either fled or surrendered, their cause dying with their leader. Jake stood in the settling dust, surrounded by the bodies of men who'd chosen the wrong side of justice. His ears rang from the gunfire, but his hands were steady as he reloaded his Colt with mechanical precision. Sarah Beth climbed down from the church tower, her rifle cradled in her arms. Carlos emerged from behind the barbershop, favoring his wounded shoulder, but grinning with fierce satisfaction. Pete limped out of the livery stable, and Tommy hobbled from behind the general store, his young face flushed with excitement and pain. "Is it over?" Tommy asked, pressing a hand to his wounded leg. Jake surveyed the carnage. Morrison's gang was finished, their leader dead, their cause buried with him in the dust of Silver Ridge. The valley was safe, but the cost had been measured in blood and pain. "It's over," he confirmed. The next crucial step was finding Morrison's antidote to the poison water supply. They searched his body and saddlebags until Sarah Beth found a small vial of clear liquid hidden in his coat pocket. "This should be it," she said, examining the contents with her medical knowledge. "We'll need to get this to the town doctor immediately." Dr. Mitchell confirmed the antidote's effectiveness and began treating the few townspeople who'd shown early symptoms of poisoning. The water supply would need to be cleaned and tested, but Silver Ridge would survive Morrison's final act of spite. Sarah Beth reached Jake's side, her green eyes searching his face for wounds. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal." Jake holstered his pistol and looked at this remarkable woman who'd appeared in his life like a miracle sent by Providence. "What about you? No regrets about marrying a man who settles disputes with gunfire?" Sarah Beth's smile lit up the dusty street like sunrise. "Mr. Coleman, I've seen enough of war to know the difference between necessary violence and senseless brutality. Today was necessary." She paused, then added quietly, "Besides, there's something I need to tell you, something that makes this victory even more important." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I think I might be carrying your child. It's too early to be certain, but the signs are there." The possibility hit Jake harder than any bullet. He stared at Sarah Beth, seeing her in an entirely new light. Not just the capable woman who'd fought beside him, but potentially the mother of his future. "When will you know for sure?" "Another month, maybe 2. Jake pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw or what they thought. After 15 years of loneliness, he'd found not just a partner, but the possibility of a family worth fighting for. Carlos cleared his throat respectfully. "Patron, what do we do about the bodies?" Jake looked around at the aftermath of Morrison's ambition. "We'll bury them properly in the town cemetery. Even enemies deserve that much dignity." "And the ranch?" Pete asked. "Gonna take a lot of work to rebuild what burned." Jake nodded. "We'll rebuild. Bigger and better than before. This valley's going to need strong leadership now that Morrison's threat has ended." Tommy stepped forward eagerly despite his wound. "I'd like to stay on, Mr. Coleman, if you'll have me. Today I learned what it means to stand for something worth defending. You've got a place here as long as you want it, son." Over the following weeks, the community came together to help rebuild Jake's ranch. Other families moved in, drawn by stories of the man who'd faced down Black Jack Morrison and lived to tell about it. Silver Ridge grew from a frontier town into a proper community with a school, a church, and a future as bright as the Colorado sun. 3 months later, Dr. Mitchell confirmed what Sarah Beth had suspected. She was indeed carrying Jake's child, due to arrive the following spring. 6 months after the gunfight, Sarah Beth delivered a healthy son they named Samuel Coleman, after the foreman who'd helped save their lives. The boy's first sight was of Colorado sky stretching endless and blue above the rebuilt ranch house. Jake taught young Samuel to ride before he could walk properly, to shoot before he could read fluently, and to understand that some things in life are worth fighting for no matter the cost. Honor, family, the land that feeds you, and the people who stand beside you when trouble comes calling. But on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the cattle settled for the night, Jake would sit on his porch with Sarah Beth and watch their son play in the yard, where blood had once soaked into the earth. The past was buried, but its lessons remained carved in memory. Some men are born to follow orders, others are born to lead by example. And a rare few are born to stand alone against the darkness when civilization needs defending. Jake Coleman had discovered which kind of man he truly was, and that knowledge would serve him well in all the years to come. The frontier had tested him and found him worthy. Now it was his turn to test the frontier and make it worthy of the family he'd fought so hard to protect. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the mountains, promising rain for the growing season ahead. But in the Coleman house, all was peace, prosperity, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done.